order. I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare a recess at any time without objection. So ordered. I'd like to welcome the witnesses to today's hearing. We have Dr. John Plumb, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy, back before the subcommittee. John, I think you win the award for the most appearances this year, so you should get a T-shirt for that. I testified at all these hearings, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt, or something like that. Next, we have Mr. Frank Calvelli, the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space Acquisitions and Integration, in his first appearance before this subcommittee. We also have Dr. Christopher Scolese, the Director of the National Reconnaissance Office, and also Ms. Tanya Wilkerson, the Deputy Director of the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency. Welcome back to all of you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your service to our nation. So we're here to discuss one of the favorite topics of this subcommittee, national security space. I was encouraged to hear General Saltzman say just last week at Space Symposium in my home district of Colorado Springs that, quote, the old ways of doing business are too slow, too late to need, and too behind the times to meet the challenges we are facing today, unquote. And I could not agree more. Those of us on this subcommittee know better than most that space is vital to how we fight and win wars. Both China and Russia have seen the advantage we built in space over the last few decades to enable the joint force. In response, they are now developing and deploying asymmetric counterspace systems meant to neutralize our advantage. China also sees the benefits of space for its own deployment of forces. It continues to develop and field its own systems to support its long-range fire and standoff capabilities. These threats are well known by this point. Discussions about the democratization of space by spacefaring nations have become more commonplace in the last 5 years. The result is more systems and more people operating in a domain that was only accessible by superpowers until very recently. Today, I would like to hear what you all are doing to address the problem that General Saltzman identified. All of us on the subcommittee are interested in how you are changing the way you do business, going faster, and becoming more innovative. The commercial space sector is setting the pace on putting inventive technologies on orbit. I would like to hear from all of you how you are leveraging these developments in government programs, how you evaluate what is useful to buy versus build, and how you are coordinating with each other to maximize your efforts. Specifically, I am interested in hearing how space acquisition organizations are working with small businesses as partners in these efforts. Dr. Plumb, one area that you and I have talked about often is how the overclassification of space contributes to inefficiencies and slower processes. 2 years ago, we asked your office to report back after looking at highly classified space programs to see what, if anything, could be reclassified. We are still waiting for that report. Meanwhile, classification of space is a pervasive problem. I believe it is impeding the department's progress on space, specifically making it more challenging to collaborate with our allies and partners. I am also interested to get your thoughts on the current state of space policy within the Department of Defense. There has not been an unclassified national security space policy document released since 2020, despite a requirement from Congress to produce one. I think you'll agree that a lot has changed in those 3 years, and public discourse is essential to getting our space policy right. Mr. Calvelli, we recently received a report from you that identified the 5 highest and lowest performing major acquisition programs in the Space Force. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like much has changed in this report. The lowest performing programs are all ground systems led by the perennial underperformer, the Operational Control System, or OCX. It's been said many times at this point that it's now a cliche, but ground systems always seem to be the afterthought when it comes to space acquisitions. Ground systems are the nuts and bolts, the bread and butter that make our exquisite satellite capabilities function. We cannot have one without the other. Today, I'd like to hear your specific plan to get programs like OCX back on track and into the hands of the force. I'd also like to hear about the policies you have implemented to make sure that we won't continue to see these problems on future ground acquisitions. And I'm also interested in hearing from the whole panel how the Department of Defense and the intelligence community are collaborating on systems and operations to support the joint force. As we come to terms with what it means for space to be a warfighting domain, we're going to continue to bump up against the line between defense and intelligence authorities. We must make sure that good collaboration continues while also allowing the Space Force to mature into its role as a service. There are many topics for us to cover today. I've gone past my time, so I'll leave it there and turn it over to my ranking member for any remarks that he would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to associate myself with your remarks, both about the topic at hand and about Mr. Plumb. Most of us around here believe in that constitutional stipulation that you're supposed to be elected to spend so much time in the House of Representatives, but we're grateful for your presence and your service. I will try to move quickly through my remarks because they're going to sound very similar to the chairman's. But thank you all very much, this entire panel of witnesses, for being here. Across the jurisdiction of the subcommittee, our national security space architecture is the one that, in my opinion, has experienced the most significant transformation over the past several years. This transformation has been necessary to respond to the rapid pace at which our adversaries are developing, deploying, and demonstrating capabilities in space and on Earth to deny, degrade, and destroy U.S. satellites. In just the past 2 years, the People's Republic of China has almost doubled their number of satellites on orbit to 400, with plans for nearly 1,000 by 2030. And they include capabilities with inherently offensive applications. Both the PRC and Russia are increasingly brazen in displaying their space warfighting capabilities, whether it be the PRC Grappler, which demonstrated the ability to drag a satellite out of its orbit, last year's incredibly destructive and debris-producing Russian anti-satellite test, or the multiple occasions where DoD and commercial satellites have been jammed during the war in Ukraine. Broadly, the PRC is putting in place the capability and capacity in space and on the ground to hold U.S. assets at risk. Given what we know about PRC ambitions with regards to Taiwan, many experts believe that their first move in a conflict would happen in space. In response to this growing threat, I'm encouraged that this administration has taken seriously the need to move away from the status quo and transition to a more robust and resilient U.S. national security space architecture. This means shifting from several exquisite big juicy targets in geosynchronous Earth orbit, or GEO, to many smaller, more commercially available satellites in low Earth orbit, or LEO. For the NRO, over the next decade, this budget request continues efforts to more than quadruple the number of satellites currently on orbit. This is a sharp departure from the attitude of the department just a few years ago. Despite repeated warnings, the Space Force was modernizing the existing space-based missile warning constellation by simply replacing the large, exquisite, unprotected satellites in the GEO orbit. Over the course of 3 years, the development price tag for next-gen OPIR ballooned to $14.4 billion with significant delays. But in 2021, Space Force pivoted to a proliferated missile warning architecture. The U.S. Space Force and the Space Development Agency, less than 3 years after contract award, just launched its first set of demonstration satellites to prove out the proliferated warfighting architecture in LEO, which will also provide data transport and missile track capabilities. DoD will be able to expand and improve capability every 2 years as soon as this technology is available, rather than waiting for the standard 10-year acquisition cycle that has plagued the space community in the past. In addition to these encouraging steps forward on acquisition, the space community is making strides on the adoption of commercial data and services, from expanding commercial imagery acquired to meet National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency requirements for the combatant commanders, or the great strides Space Systems Command has made to purchase commercial satellite communications and space domain awareness data. This adoption of commercial space has allowed DoD to focus on inherently military needs and stay ahead of our adversaries in the domain. We have also made significant progress in the past several years with our incredible network of allies and partners. In addition to the work being done to share space domain awareness and adversary space capabilities, the DoD Space Policy Guidance released last August explicitly directs that our space cooperation with allies and partners include policy, strategy, capabilities, information sharing, and operations. The administration's announcement that it would not conduct destructive debris-producing direct-descent anti-satellite testing has opened the door to 12 other nations committing to do the same. The U.S. must continue to lead by example on establishing norms of behavior for the responsible use and operations within the space domain. Now, I'm increasingly encouraged by the direction of our space program as a whole, but there are some areas we'll continue to watch closely. In addition to the pattern of large satellite programs being late and over budget, the ground system architecture still frequently comes as an afterthought, and the chairman mentioned this already. Another area where we continue our oversight is in the overclassification of space, another thing the chairman mentioned, which inhibits both our ability to advocate for increasing investment and expanding collaborations with our allies and partners. Space is a fascinating and infinite domain. Until recently, we really only experienced it through the lens of science fiction. But in reality, space has been a part of our daily lives as Americans since the dawn of the space race. And our adversaries are keenly aware of that. Our warfighters everywhere, on the ground, under the sea, and in the air, depend on space. But so do people all around the world, from Americans driving to work or checking the weather to Ukrainians valiantly fighting the unprovoked invasion by the Russians. The global dependence on space often means relying on American satellites. We must keep them secure, not only against the threat we see today, but what we will face in the years and decades to come. I look forward to today's discussion with our witnesses on how to best maintain U.S. superiority in space and how this year's President's budget request does that. Thank you.
All right, our first witness will be the Honorable Dr. John Plumb, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy with the Department of Defense. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Lamborn. Thank you, Ranking Member Moulton, members of the committee. Thanks for inviting me to testify today on the Department's national security space programs. I'm honored to appear with my colleagues, Assistant Secretary Calvelli, Director Chris Scolese, and Deputy Director Tanya Wilkerson. Space plays a critical role in our nation's security, in our prosperity, in our way of life. For the Department of Defense, space is essential to how we compete and fight in every domain. It provides us with a missile warning and missile tracking critical to defending our homeland. It provides position, navigation, and timing to strike targets with precision. And it provides communication in austere environments to support global command and control. To put it simply, space-based missions are essential to the U.S. way of war. But our competitors understand this. They are fielding and developing increasingly complex capabilities to deny space missions to the U.S. Joint Force. In just the last few years, the quantity and quality of counter-space threats has increased significantly. China has already fielded ground-based counter-space weapons, including direct-ascent ASAT missiles, and it continues to seek new methods to hold our satellites at risk. China is building a space architecture that enables its military to execute long-range precision strikes. China ultimately seeks to challenge our ability to conduct joint operations in the Indo-Pacific. Russia is developing, testing, and fielding its own counter-space systems, including ground-based and space-based kinetic anti-satellite weapons. These are aimed at degrading and denying U.S. space-based services. President Biden's $33.3 billion space budget for fiscal year 24 invests in the capabilities necessary to meet these challenges. This investment reflects an increase of roughly 15% from fiscal year 23. The President's budget request will accelerate our transition to resilient by design architectures. It will enhance our ability to fight through disruption. It will invest heavily in research, development, testing, and experimentation. And it will further integrate space-based services across the Joint Force. The budget request includes nearly $5 billion for missile warning and missile track, including $2.3 billion for new proliferated resilient architectures and $2.6 billion for next-generation overhead persistent infrared. It has $1.3 billion for position, navigation, and timing, including development of the next-generation operational control system for GPS. There's $3 billion for 15 launch vehicles and range upgrades, and there's $4.7 billion for protected and jam-resistant satellite communications, and this includes the Space Development Agency's Space Data Transport Layer. And the budget request also includes additional investments in ground user equipment, science and technology research, and classified programs. Now, my office remains laser-focused on three priorities: space control, space cooperation, and space classification. On space control, the Department will protect and defend our national security interests from the growing scope and scale of space and counter-space threats. And we will, of course, protect and defend our servicemen and women in harm's way from space-enabled threats. For space cooperation, we are investing in relationships with allies, with partners, and with commercial space. These partnerships are an enduring strength and an asymmetric advantage our competitors can never hope to match. And for space classification, the Department is working at the highest levels to remove barriers to sharing information with our allies and to strengthen and streamline our ability to communicate across the U.S. government. And I'll just note both the chairman and the ranking members' strong interest in their opening statements in this issue as well. Our competitors have watched us, they have learned from us, they have stolen from us, and they have developed capabilities to hold us at risk. But they are not ready for us. They're not ready for us today. And with congressional support for the national security space investments in the President's fiscal year 24 budget request, they will not be ready for us tomorrow. So thank you to the committee for your tireless dedication to the department and U.S. national security, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. We will next hear from the Honorable Frank Calvelli, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space Acquisitions and Integration. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We continue to face an unprecedented strategic competitor in China, and our space environment continues to become more congested and contested. To address these challenges, we are fundamentally transforming our space architecture to be more resilient, proliferated, and integrated to meet warfighter requirements and to counter the growing threats. Today, I would like to discuss the architecture changes that we are making, capabilities that we are delivering, and how we are overseeing and managing the space acquisition enterprise. We are moving away from those big, juicy targets, highly capable systems but very vulnerable in small numbers, to smaller, proliferated, resilient systems across multiple mission areas. For example, we are pivoting from the legacy missile warning architecture to a proliferated, resilient architecture that adds capability to actually track missile threats. We are adding new capabilities to our space domain awareness architecture to focus on deterring and defending against attempts to negate our critical space capabilities. We are fundamentally transforming our military satellite communications and data transport architecture through disaggregation, proliferation, capacity expansion, partnership with allies, and with commercial, which will enhance our ability to fight in contested and degraded operational environments. We are also collaborating with the intelligence community to design, develop, deploy, and operate a proliferated space-based ground-moving target indication system. Overall, these architecture changes help transform our space architecture to be more resilient, integrated, and provide new capabilities for our warfighters. Over the past 15 months, we continue to deliver new critical capabilities. The Space Systems Command delivered last year into operations 2 new geosynchronous space situational awareness program satellites, a new space-based infrared missile warning satellite, which completes the SBIRS architecture, and a new GPS-3 satellite, which achieved operational acceptance in just 12 days after launch. The Space Rapid Capabilities Office delivered their first set of missions to orbit, including 2 prototype enhanced situational awareness sensors and 1 new cryptographic payload. And the Space Development Agency delivered their first 10 satellites to orbit last month, which included 2 tracking and 8 data transport satellites. This was accomplished in less than 3 years from contract award to launch. And the Department launched 9 national security space launch missions, providing critical capability across the nation. On launch, the next National Security Space Launch Phase 3 procurement starts in FY25, pursues a dual-lane hybrid contracting approach to maximize competition and use of the nation's robust commercial launch industry as we transition to more proliferated architectures. Fiscal year 24 also marks the first time the Space Force has specifically budgeted for tactically responsive space, and we acknowledge responsive space as an emerging need and thank Congress for your leadership in this mission area. As the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space Acquisition and Integration, I am focused on adding speed to our acquisitions and delivering our programs on cost and schedule. I recognize that I inherited several trouble programs that are behind schedule and overrun on cost. I am paying close attention to those programs. Overall, I am proactively managing the space acquisition enterprise through weekly status reports, bi-weekly tag-ups with my portfolio leads, and detailed quarterly program reviews. These reviews enable me to ensure all our programs remain focused on delivering capabilities to the warfighters on cost and on schedule. In October of 22, I issued strategic acquisition guidance to the workforce outlining 9 space acquisition tenets. You'll be happy to see that one of those tenets is deliver ground systems before launch. These tenets form the basis of a new direction for space acquisition and emphasize speed and program management discipline while addressing the fundamental issues that slow up space acquisition. I am committed to using all the tools and authorities Congress has provided to help speed up space acquisition. This includes use of Section 804 middle tier of acquisition, use of other transactional authorities, and use of the Space Acquisition Council to ensure collaboration and integration while avoiding duplication of effort across the entire national security space enterprise. In summary, in recognition of the evolving threats, the Department is transforming its space architecture to be more resilient, more integrated, and more capable. We continue to deliver critical capabilities in its operations for our warfighters. We are focused on adding speed to our space acquisitions and proactively overseeing and managing the space acquisition portfolios. Thank you to the committee for all your support, and I look forward to your questions.
And thank you for your testimony. We will now hear from Dr. Christopher Scolese, Director of the National Reconnaissance Office. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Lamborn, Ranking Member Moulton, and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to appear before you today with my colleagues John Plumb, Frank Calvelli, and Tanya Wilkerson, and to represent the dedicated workforce of the National Reconnaissance Office. Thanks to the support of Congress, the NRO is creating the most capable, diverse, and resilient overhead intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance constellation in our history. We're building capabilities to solve the nation's hardest intelligence challenges. We use cutting-edge technologies, both in space and on the ground, to deliver more information faster than ever before. Our capabilities provide vital intelligence that can only be obtained from space. This includes geolocations and real-time situational awareness for our warfighters, high-resolution imagery that helps intelligence analysts make informed decisions, and support that aids humanitarian responses to natural disasters. All of this helps make America and the world beyond stronger and safer. We're building innovation, agility, and resilience into everything we do. This ensures we can answer the toughest intelligence questions of today and tomorrow. We're designing and delivering systems that can perform multiple types of intelligence missions and quickly pivot among them, whether the needs are traditional analytical support, military requirements for crises like the events in Ukraine, or for humanitarian efforts. Demonstration systems are proving concepts, reducing time for deployment of operational systems and enabling us to fill key intelligence gaps more quickly. All of this requires a skilled and dedicated workforce. I'm proud to say that our team of military, DoD, and IC civilians truly lives up to our motto, above and beyond. We continue to attract great people from the CIA and military, and with the cadre that is now a little more than 6 years old, we just had our best recruiting year and continue to attract outstanding interns, many of whom come to the NRO. This ensures we have a pipeline of talent and skills necessary to maintain our advantage. The qualities I just described, innovation, agility, and resilience, are integral to our ability to stay ahead of our competitors. Our competitors are developing weapons to destroy or interfere with our satellites, as has been mentioned. To stay ahead of the competition and ensure we continue to operate in a heightened threat environment, we're modernizing our architecture on the space and ground. With the strong support of Congress over the last several years, we're improving capabilities, becoming faster, more agile, and more resilient. These investments are already paying off. I'm happy to report that just in the last year, we have fielded over 5 new systems demonstrating innovative capabilities, improved utilization of data, and upgraded our ground infrastructure, with even more to come this year. The NRO is building and delivering a diversified, proliferated architecture that includes large and small satellites, both government and commercial, in multiple orbits. In the next few years, we'll grow from dozens of systems on orbit to hundreds. This will enable us to spend more time over a given area, minimize the time between observations, and offer more capability and a higher degree of resilience. We are pushing boundaries. We're thinking differently. We're using automation and tools to speed the delivery of data. We know we can't solve today's most difficult challenges on our own. We depend on our partnerships. The most critical of those is the U.S. Space Force. Our partnership continues to grow stronger as we expand our interactions and deliver on capabilities. 2 examples of the numerous joint efforts between the Space Force and NRO are the ground moving target indication, as Mr. Calvelli mentioned, and the Silent Barker system. GMTI will track ground and maritime targets for the warfighter, day or night, in all kinds of weather in the very near future. Silent Barker will provide situational awareness in space, will be launching later this summer. Our partnerships with allies continue to expand and provide increased capabilities that allow us to share information, provide multiple launch locations, and increase the exchange of data and technologies. The NRO is leveraging the power of U.S. space industry, both traditional and emerging, from commercial data and launch to commodity spacecraft. Industry is helping us create the architectures we are building today. NRO initiatives like the Strategic Commercial Enhancements Framework and the Director's Innovation Initiative allow us to explore new and emerging capabilities and technologies with a wide range of industry, big and small. At the same time, we're ensuring the quality of materials and the integrity of the supply chain and are not compromised in the name of speed. For more than 60 years, the NRO has developed tools and technologies to bring the farthest reaches of the planet to our grasp. We're using the vantage point to find answers to some of the nation's most important national security questions. Mr. Chairman, what was a vision a few years ago is quickly becoming a reality. Thank you for having me today. I look forward to the committee's questions.
Thank you. And before we have our fourth and final witness, I just want to remind everybody that as soon as we are done with one round of questions, we will recess and go upstairs to the SCIF on the third floor and have a closed session. Now we will hear from Tanya Wilkerson, Deputy Director of the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lambourne, Ranking Member Moulton, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. The National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency is the leader in timely, accurate, and actionable geospatial intelligence that provides a decisive advantage to warfighters, policymakers, and first responders. GeoInt goes beyond telling you what, where, and when something is happening. It also reveals how it is happening, why it matters, and what is likely to happen next. Our principal focus is advancing GeoInt capabilities to fulfill our role as both a combat support agency and a member of the intelligence community. NGA's GeoInt professionals work across more than 120 locations at home and abroad. We have support teams embedded with U.S. government agencies, combatant commands, service intelligence centers, and most service operational centers for targeting and to allow them to navigate safely around the globe every day. NGA has well-defined responsibilities for aeronautical and maritime safety of navigation, but we are still working to evolve the foundation GeoInt role as it applies to the space domain. Just as NGA's predecessors agencies mapped the moon ahead of the Apollo missions, today we are working with NASA to develop the lunar geodetic system that will be the coordinate framework for accurate and safe movement on the moon. We partner with the U.S. Space Force and U.S. Space Command to ensure GeoInt fully supports strategic intelligence assessments of adversary space and counter-space threats and activities. Our presence assists with collection management and allows us to team on future architecture requirements and career development and training of GeoInt-capable guardians. We have seen a dramatic increase in demand for space-related GeoInt, and NGA is increasing our focus on cutting-edge analysis of our adversary space-related equipment and activities on Earth and in space. This is reflected in our new motto, Know the World, Show the Way, from seabed to space. This revision acknowledges that our changing world requires a steadfast effort across every domain, including evolving areas that require both exquisite tradecraft and our dedicated attention. In addition to producing GeoInt analysis on adversary capabilities, NGA's foundational physical modeling of our planet directly supports the DoD by ensuring the precision and accuracy of GPS and maintaining the WGS-84 reference frame. These are the backbone for the geolocation our forces require for targeting and to allow them to navigate and operate safely around the globe. As the volume of GeoInt data expands with the proliferation of collection systems and expansion into the space domain, the transfer of Project Maven to NGA will play an essential role to future military operations. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are capable of quickly fusing enormous amounts of data from across disparate data sets and provide meaningful answers. NGA will further automate significant portions of dynamic collection, imagery exploitation, and reporting workflows to rapidly exploit data and anticipate activity. NGA continues to grow and evolve its space intelligence mission through people, partnerships, and capabilities to meet current and future partner needs. We will continue to have a vested interest in the space domain as much of our overall GeoInt mission is enabled by data from space systems. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Okay, thank you. We will now have questions from the members of the subcommittee. I'll go ahead and jump in first. Dr. Plumb, your office owes us several reports. There are four I'm specifically interested in: on reclassification, space policy review, a strategy on the protection of satellites, and a report on opportunities for collaboration between the U.S. and Israel on space. When can we expect to get these reports?
Thanks, Chairman Lamborn. I'll just address a couple at a time here. So first of all, aware and tracking of the reports that we owe you, sir, and we are working on them. 1602 and 1611. 1602 is the unclassified protect and defend strategy you've requested, and 1611 is the unclassified space policy review. Working on a comprehensive answer to both of those. There's obviously more equities than just my office in all of these. So that should be out for coordination soon in the building, so I hope to get that to you in the next few months. The 1609 on the Space Force capabilities and classification, we might better save that for the classified session, but we are working hard on it, and I'm working with your team on this. But as you know, there is a SAP reform effort, and I have been loath to get ahead of that. And then on the U.S. and Israel space cooperation piece, aware of that, and I will make sure we dig into that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Calvelli, I am encouraged by many innovative acquisition approaches I have seen the Space Force taking, but I am concerned that Space Systems Command seems to be using old approaches that do not serve a fast-paced acquisition model. Mr. Moulton and I are planning to visit SSC on Monday in Los Angeles, where I expect we will hear more details about this. But what changes have you implemented to speed up the acquisition process out of SSC?
I think you're going to be very impressed when you visit SSC. They are doing an outstanding job. They have really stepped up their game. For example, if I look at the MEO missile warning missile tracking capability that they're providing, it's an outstanding effort building small sats in medium Earth orbit. They've done some really great work on some ground systems, if you can believe that. They've done some really outstanding work in terms of where they're heading with GPS and how that program is progressing. And so they've taken to the 9 tenets that I put out back in October. They are looking at going smaller with their systems. They are looking at going faster. They understand the direction we want to head in, and I'm really proud of the team out that way, so I hope you enjoy your trip out that way and see the great work that they're doing.
Okay, thank you. And also, Mr. Calvelli, I am concerned about the incorporation of small businesses in space acquisitions. My district in Colorado Springs, for instance, is home to scores of small businesses who are pursuing many innovative space technologies. And I know that other members of the subcommittee also represent these types of small businesses. Can you share with the committee initiatives you have put in place to increase the participation of small businesses in space acquisition programs within your purview?
Yes, so I think the whole approach about building smaller and trying to get systems in place between, less than 3 years from contract award to launch is really going to be a key to taking advantage of small business. Right now, today, when we build it takes 7 years to build a satellite, and then we build the second block, and it takes another 7 years to get there. You're talking 12 to 14 years for technology refresh. If we're launching new systems and developing in less than 3 years and launching them every 2 years, you're talking about significant opportunity for technology refresh and opportunity to on-ramp new and innovative technologies. So that's really fundamentally my approach of getting at that.
That's exciting. That's great to hear. And finally, for all members of the panel, and we'll start with Ms. Wilkerson and go down in this direction. As we mature the concept of space as a warfighting domain, how are you thinking about the difference between intelligence and Department of Defense operational missions? Where do you draw that line?
So thank you for the question, sir. As a combat support agency and a member of the intelligence community, we are very well informed of the national intelligence priorities as well as the priorities of the warfighters. And so we try to ensure that we are addressing the needs of both of our user sets.
And a very similar answer, as we principally provide capability, as you know, from space, and our requirements generally cover both the military needs and the intelligence community needs, and oftentimes we see that they overlap very significantly. So we work very closely with the department and the IC to make sure that our requirements satisfy their needs.
And if you can say so in this setting, if not, we'll hold off until we're in classified setting, but that overlap, does that create friction at times, or is there a great collaboration instead of friction?
We can talk more in the other session, but I would say that there is great collaboration. I mentioned Silent Barker just a little bit earlier. That's a very tight collaboration that's going to launch this year. That's going to allow us to greatly improve our space domain awareness. GMTI, as Mr. Calvelli and I mentioned, we have had that capability, but we know we have to expand it. We need to work together in order to make that truly what the warfighter needs.
Okay, and quickly, Mr. Calvelli and Dr. Plumb.
Yeah, so I have seen absolutely no duplication of effort, and what I've seen is just a great partnership, and the DoD relies every day on the great stuff that Chris and his team build. So it's a great partnership out there between the IC and DoD.
Great.
And sir, I would just echo that and say I don't think it's ever been stronger, the cooperation, collaboration between DoD and IC, and I think this is a perfect example of how much more we can unlock with that type of relationship.
Okay, thank you all for what you do and for being here today. Representative Moulton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to defer most of my questions to the classified session, but just a couple things. Ms. Wilkerson, beginning with you, your agency has provided great support for the war in Ukraine, and everyone wants to know what are the lessons that we're learning from this. If you had to just pick one lesson that you specifically in your work have taken from the war in Ukraine, what would it be?
Thank you for the question, sir. I think the one takeaway would be the critical importance of partnerships, not only partnerships across the U.S. government, but across our allies as well, and to be able to continue to meet user needs with respect to ensuring that we are doing so at speed and scale.
Well, that is the perfect answer to segue into my next question for Dr. Plumb. You have talked about the overclassification of space. I know this is something you've been working on. How do you see this affecting our relationships with allies and partners and our ability to collaborate on space projects?
So thank you, Ranking Member. I would say a couple things. One, working with allies and partners is absolutely essential in this security environment. And on space in particular, the inability to share some classified information with highly capable allies is slowing us down, and we're working on it. But I don't want that to be misconstrued. We do share classified information with allies. The question is, can we share more, especially for operationally relevant speeds to be able to do combined space operations?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Okay, now we'll hear questions from Mr. Waltz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Plumb, can you talk to just for a moment about what's going on with Spectrum and with international organizations, and do we have a strategy to deny our adversaries necessary spectrum as it gets increasingly crowded up there? And conversely, do we have a strategy to protect spectrum that we may need and don't want to find ourselves 5-10 years from now with the PRC, for example, sitting in a key space?
So, sir, I can't. Let me just answer the part that I'm partially responsible for, if that's all right. So
I should have asked probably, does the interagency, and you would have a key part of it, and that's
so
my concern.
if I could just lay flat, the main concern of DoD at this moment is the issue of the 3.1 to 3.45 gigahertz portion of the spectrum, the S-band. That we have an agreement between the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Commerce to conduct a study as to whether this portion of the spectrum can be shared. The department relies heavily across all of our forces on that spectrum to communicate and fight and to defend the United States. And so the question is, can it be shared? The question is not, can it be vacated and can we move somewhere else? I've testified prior hearings that would be extraordinarily costly and it would take decades just to get back to where we are now. And it's also not a question of can we partially vacate, by which I mean give up some portion of the spectrum. The question is, can it be shared in a way that we can do our mission and protect the homeland and then allow commercial entities to also work in that space?
I think what I'm trying to get the department and some others to think more broadly is we are increasingly, and I think rightly, interoperable with commercial. And then we see our adversaries through a number of means taking key spectrum in the commercial space. I think my concern is the department and our agency is like, hey, that's a commercial issue. But we could find ourselves at a real disadvantage. Does that make sense?
It does. I do think, the department is focused on use of spectrum. The nearest one we're focused on is, again, 3.1 to 3.45, but there are other portions that folks all across this table rely on just for the space piece only. And I think your point is well taken that we need to be looking further down, further in the future to make sure we're also protecting the next thing that might come under.
I think our adversaries certainly are. Separately, can you talk to, I know there's some efforts underway. I've talked to General Thompson a good bit about it, and I've raised this before in terms of modeling a CREF for space, a Civil Reserve fleet. Understand there was just can you just talk to the department's efforts along those lines and when you think you would have something you can come back to the committee with? I think it's incredibly important as we look at resiliency, redundancy, and to really have these agreements in place now, should we ever need them in a time of emergency.
So, first of all, fully agree. We need to be able to access our commercial space partners and their capacity and bandwidth, maybe something like a CRAF agreement, if not exactly that. I will say that the Secretary and Deputy Secretary have charged all of us to work on that, and different components are SSC is working on it, Director Scolese is working on it. I'm kind of working on it from a policy overall arching piece. I would say, as to when we could get back to you with a coherent story, I mean, we could provide, where we are now, but I would say in summer we could probably provide a much more fulsome response as to where we are in each of these pieces and how they're coming together. We're all taken with it. It's very important, and I think this is the right time to make sure we're doing it.
No, great. That's good to hear. I think we're moving in the right direction. Just the time I have remaining, our adversaries have clearly militarized space. I mean, let's look at the PRC's new space station and who's manning that. Do we need to rethink our own protocols? Do we need to have manned applications and platforms both on the moon and in low Earth orbit with a U.S. military application and capability?
I haven't considered the concept of actually, if you're asking, do I have to have people in orbit to defend orbit, I don't think that is correct. I think what we need to make sure is that we have the right ability and we have a Space Force, working hard on this to protect and defend our own systems, both in space, and protect and defend our troops on the ground from space-enabled threats, and we're working hard on both of those.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We will now have questions from Representative Vasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the witnesses for taking the time to speak with us today. As you're well aware, space is an increasingly important domain for national security. Nowhere is that more understood than in my home district in my home state of New Mexico. In my district, White Sands Missile Range is currently testing and developing the Deep Space Advanced Radar Capability, or the DARC program. This impressive radar technology detects objects with extreme precision, which allows our operators to have adequate time to maneuver satellites away from debris before a potential collision and give them the ability to identify potential civil and military satellites that may pose threats to our national security. This question is for Dr. Plumb. How does White Sands Missile Range testing and development of the DARC program support our national security efforts in space?
Sir, the DARC program is very important, as you just pointed out. I think the ability to have good space domain awareness, including through radar capabilities, is essential to be able to do safe navigation, track orbit, and that applies not just for national security missions, but really for all space missions.
Great. And Dr. Plumb, do you think it would be a priority of the Department of Defense to continue on the R&D of the DARC program?
Generally, yes. I think we make sure that it works well and we continue R&D. I don't know if Mr. Calvelli might have something to add on that since that
Sure, Mr.
program's
Calvelli.
Yeah,
been-
Go ahead.
thanks to the help from the folks from your great organization, with the folks out of Wismar. We proved out the concepts that DART can actually work.
Sure.
And thanks to great work by John Hopkins and APL and those folks who developed the prototype. And because of that, we are building the systems.
Great.
We're going to deploy them globally, and it's going to be something we really, really critically need to keep track of objects at GEO. So thanks to the folks at Wismar for helping us out with that.
Absolutely, and I'm so happy to hear that because we want to make sure that we're continuing to fund cutting-edge both space exploration and national security tools at places like White Sands Missile Range and in conjunction with some of our partners at Holloman Air Force Base and at Kirtland Air Force Base. Not only is New Mexico an essential part of testing and developing these types of technologies, but we play an integral role in manufacturing key physical space infrastructure. For example, New Mexico is one of only 2 domestic providers of space-qualified satellite solar cells. This industry employs hundreds of folks in New Mexico, many in the Albuquerque area, including in my district, who make this mission possible. Now, these good-paying, highly skilled jobs have contributed to over 1,000 satellites that are currently in orbit. And I've always said, if we can design it in New Mexico and test it in New Mexico, we should be able to build it in New Mexico. And through our work on this committee, I want to ensure that we will continue to be key contributors to supporting satellite-based space missions for years to come. Dr. Plumb and Secretary Calvelli, what is the state of our current satellite production capabilities for both military and commercial use?
You know, so far it seems pretty good. I mean, the nation's experienced an economic boom in terms of the commercial space, and that has been something that we've been able to leverage, especially in the standpoint of satellite buses and being able to buy buses off production lines and add payloads to them and get them launched quickly, like we just did with the Space Development Agency system. So far from what I have seen, sir, the environment's pretty good.
Great. Dr. Plumb?
I think I'll just add, fully take your point on the solar cell manufacturing and the difference between solar cells for space qualified and ground, and the importance of being able to do that at scale.
Thank you, Dr. Plumb. It's incredibly important that we have these domestic and very robust satellite production capabilities. And in our home state in New Mexico and in our district, I think we're very interested in continuing to produce those. So thank you for your responses today. Yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you. Representative Wilson.
And thank you very much, Chairman Lambert and Ranking Member Seth Moulton, for putting together this bipartisan hearing. And you can see we want you to succeed. And so with that in mind, Secretary Plumb, the senior Department of Defense officials and Defense Intelligence Agency officials have developed the Challenges to Security in Space 2022 report, and points to a rapid rise of the adversary counter space capabilities, especially for China and Russia. We have seen demonstrations of these capabilities, including China's ability to move a defunct satellite and Russia's destruction of a satellite in November 2021. What is the DoD's assessment of China's and Russia's ability and intent to operationalize such capabilities should a direct conflict arise? And what is DoD's assessment of the current requirement and response options if China and Russia operationalize such capabilities? To what extent has the conflict and the invasion of Ukraine by war criminal Putin impacted Russian development?
Thank you, Congressman. Just in order, on the ability of Russia or China to operationalize these capabilities, I think from a military mindset, once we see something tested, we have to assume it has some operational capability as well. So I think that's just a standard conservative form of planning, and that's what we do. We're a contingency planning department. On the DoD response options, I'll just make clear, and this is not a new statement, but Department reserves the right to respond at a time, place, and domain of our choosing, and that's across any domain: space, cyber, air, ground, land. And your third question on how the Ukraine conflict is affecting Russia's ability, my assessment there would simply be that the sanctions have made it harder for Russia to get at some type of modern chipsets and equipment and that has set them back some as they try to find workarounds.
And again, every effort to match or meet or exceed opposition, please. We are, again, in bipartisan support. And Dr. Scolese, our partnerships with allies continue to expand and help to provide and increase capabilities and flexibility. During the ongoing invasion of Ukraine by war criminal Putin, we've been working together with NRO systems that have provided vital support to our European partners and allies in NATO. What has the NRO systems supporting our allies and partners in Europe against war criminal Putin? Are we leveraging and building relationships with our allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific area of operations with the ongoing threats of the Chinese Communist Party to Taiwan? And then also in the Middle East, what are we doing to recognize the regime in Iran, which still chants death to Israel, death to America?
Yes, sir. I can best answer that question in the next session, but at a broad level, we have very strong partnerships. We've learned a lot from Ukraine and how to work with our allies to both share information and share technologies where that to enhance our capabilities and to enhance their capabilities at the same time. And I would like to turn a little bit of this over to Ms. Wilkerson, because we work directly through them, and that's where the direct support to the allies comes from. So our systems provide the information, and they deliver it.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for the question. As I noted earlier, one of the key critical lessons learned through the crisis has been the importance of allied sharing with our partners, and specifically the allies. One of the other highlights that I would note is that the nature of commercial GEOINT in particular makes it especially valuable as an opportunity to be able to share and continue to strengthen the partnerships with our allies as well.
And it's an unintended consequence of war criminal Putin is that we're all, NATO is enhanced with Sweden and Finland. How incredible the resources of both of those countries that we should be working so closely with. So I wish you well and best wishes for continued success. I yield back.
Thank you. Now we'll have questions from Representative Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for the witnesses, thank you. Very important information and much appreciated. My question goes to you, Ms. Wilkinson. The National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency has state-of-the-art equipment capable of providing time-critical information to firefighters. Needless to say, we have plenty of those throughout the entire nation and indeed the world. The access to such information should not be held financial hostage to other agencies. Yet, in fiscal years 2011 to 2018, FEMA paid nearly $1 million reimbursing the NGA for information. Money's not just the issue here, it's the time necessary to get the information. We've introduced legislation called the Military Support for Fighting Wildfires Act. It's co-sponsored by Ms. Jacobs and Mr. Carbajal. We introduced it last year. We're going to do it again this year. It basically would require that the NGA make information readily available to our firefighters as they attempt to save our communities and our lives. Do you have a position on this issue, and can you explain to me how we can make this work?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. So NGA is reimbursed only if another federal government agency, such as FEMA, designates NGA as a mission assigned. And it's in that instance that there would be a reimbursement. From an NGA perspective, we do not initiate reimbursement for mission support to any domestic crisis response. As it relates to wildfire disasters, we do have two programs that can support wildfire disasters, and we do operate those programs 24/7, and that support is not based in an event reaching a major disaster classification. Our support is constant, and it is not intended to incur any additional costs or manpower for wildfire support.
I appreciate your answer. We do have a administrative complexity here to make sure that information is readily available on time 24/7. I do know you do collect it. Making it available sometimes gets to be a bureaucratic difficulty. So we look forward to the legislation which clears all of that up. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Okay, we have no other members to ask questions, so we will take a 5-minute recess and convene in the SCIF at 2337, I believe is the room number, one floor up. Thank you.